And this is going to sound very, very far out. In Tibetan Buddhism, you have this idea of the pure realms or pure lands, which are nirvanic states of existence. So they are spaces that can be visited through your mind. The dream plan for this year has been visiting those realms. And when you visit them, of course, nothing is going anywhere. And you realize that stuff there is not made how stuff is made here. It's made of light. Form is made of light in these spaces. So you have these very, very interesting and very powerful experiences of visiting worlds that are made of light.
Charlie Morley is a lucid dreaming teacher and author who helps people wake up in their dreams and harness the power of sleep for psychological and spiritual growth. In this wide-ranging conversation, we discuss how lucid dreams work and how they can be used to improve your everyday life and support spiritual development.
So anything you do in the lucid dream, the brain lays down neural pathways just as it would when you are awake. And not only that, crucially, it stores the memory of what you do in the lucid dream, not as a dream memory, but as a waking memory. And that is the crux of how lucid dream trauma integration happens.
Charlie believes that if we spend a third of our life asleep, why not use that time to enrich our lives and experience personal growth?
Everything we do in lucid dreams is for waking state betterment, because we're asleep for a third of our lives, right? Which sounds huge, but we're awake for 2/3 of it. So if these sleep and dream practices don't directly benefit the 2/3 of our life that we're awake, maybe they're not such a big deal. But as far as waking state applications, it can be used to integrate trauma. You can work with your inner child and deal with all your childhood stuff. You can ask big questions. You can call out things like, show me what I need to see in relation to a certain work project. You could just use it for fun if you like. You can use it for spiritual practice. You can use it in a big way for shadow integration.
We also discuss the difference in perspectives between Western lucid dreaming and the Eastern wisdom traditions.
However, once you get into the lucid dream state from a Buddhist point of view, you're using the lucid dream state not for the integration of the self as it is in the West, but the complete moving beyond the illusory notion of the self and into a place where you can reach full spiritual awakening while you sleep.
Before we get into this conversation, I want to ask you to join this amazing community of consciousness explorers. This whole idea of pursuing expanded consciousness and the boundaries of human potential while living a modern life is relatively new, which is why we interview revered masters, teachers, experts, and practitioners to help you on your own journey. To stay up to date on the latest conversations, simply click subscribe below and you'll be notified each time a new episode comes out. I am so grateful for all of your support and comments. I love reading them. Now let's dive into this conversation. Charlie, well, it's great to have you on the show, man. How you doing today?
I'm good, thank you. Great to be here.
So lucid dreaming, man, it's this interesting phenomena, concept. It's infiltrated Western culture a little bit. I can't wait to just explore it all with you and also how it relates to the broader arc of consciousness and spiritual development. But maybe just to jump off, like, how did this become something that you were interested in?
I mean, I was into dreams from really young. Like, I was one of those kids who, like, every morning I'd be wanting to talk about my dreams. And I remember my mum, she did used to say, like, and then what happened? You know, which I think is just, it's a simple phrase, isn't it? But, and then what? Is such a brilliant question to ask kids because, you know, maybe everybody else's kids wake up in the morning and try and tell their parents their dreams. But maybe other parents are just like, so what? But if you can just say, and what else, you know, and what next, or what else happened. So I remember mum encouraging me to talk about my dreams. Although I remember sometimes I would just say something was my dream and it wasn't. You know, as a kid, I remember not being able to fully tell the difference. And that's true. If you look at the studies they do on children's capacity to lucid dream, they start the studies at around 6 years old. Because if you ask a child under 6 years old about their dreams, they tend to tell you just what they love. You know, they can't quite make that differentiation between actually the hallucinations you have when you close your eyes and go to sleep is what we're really asking about, right? Anyway, so into dreams from really young. Then
can I just zoom in on that for a second?
Yeah.
With the children and lucid dreaming, do they have an increased capacity relative to a normal adult?
Let's jump into the science, dude. Yeah, like straight up. So Harvard Medical School did a thing. They did one did a big study on in British school children actually in the 90s. Long story short, lucid dreaming is a natural phenomenon of childhood brain development. So not every child every night, but most children will have multiple lucid dreams as part of their childhood development. They studied kids ages 6 to 16 and found that the frequency in some children was up to like 3 spontaneous lucid dreams a week, which is way higher than most adults. I mean, I don't have 3 lucid dreams a week when I'm trying, or unless I'm in like serious training mode, So that's a high frequency, right? Um, so yeah, it seems to come factory installed, which tells us two really important things, which is one, lucid dreaming is natural. It's not some alien imposition. It's nothing we're forcing the mind to do. It's a natural inbuilt capacity. And number two, we don't need to learn how to lucid dream. We need to remember, because it's a bit like a language we used to speak as a child, but no longer speak. I used to speak French as a kid, right? And then a few years ago, I started doing some French evening classes, and I like sped to the top of the class. Of course I did, because although I couldn't remember consciously how to speak French, my unconscious could remember. And I could learn French again much quicker. And I'm sure everyone else has had a similar experience. So too with lucid dreaming. It seems like this like super complex, high spiritual practice, and it can be, and it is. But actually our learning of it can be greatly heightened when we realize, first of all, we've done this before multiple times. And secondly, if it was childhood that we learned to lucid dream, or that we started lucid dreaming, then actually it's the inner child, that sense of play, that we need to focus on if we want to learn to lucid dream again, which is, of course, the opposite of the way most people try and teach themselves lucid dreaming, which is like, right, I've got to go around all day, like looking at my hand, and then I've got to like write down my dreams at night. And, oh shit, I didn't remember my dreams. Like, you ain't even going to get a sleep, let alone have a lucid dream. But if you
Yeah.
can have a sense of play, like, oh, this is so cool, man. Imagine if I can have a lucid dream. Imagine being inside a huge 3-dimensional virtual reality simulation of my own psychology. How cool would that be? That sense of wonder, that uplift, going, my energy's going up,
Mm.
right? Rather than, oh, I've got to have a lucid dream. Like, I've trained, I've got to do this thing. I paid for the workshop. I need to have my lucid dream. No, we need to keep it super, super playful. And if you can, lucidity is within reach.
There's so many metaphors to what you just described as part of the broader consciousness journey. A few things that come up for me is this idea of, instead of like constructing something new, it's really an unlayering of what already is and always has been. And that's true of many human capacities that go unrealized, including lucid dreaming. And the other, and I imagine it sounds like remembrance. We'll get into kind of how to do this, but there's the remembrance, but then I'm pretty sure there's also part of it is kind of unblocking the things that get in the way of that, right? All the programming and conditioning and concepts that prevent us from just realizing what is already innate to us.
And that's the spiritual
And
path.
that's right. And
Like,
that's the whole essence,
yeah, like this is the idea of Vajrayana Buddhism, right? That you're already enlightened, and that the spiritual path is about removing the veils of ignorance that prevent you from seeing your already enlightened nature. It's not about becoming enlightened. It's about removing the veils of ignorance that prevent you already seeing that you are. Like, that's huge. That's so huge. It's like, but it's so huge we can't comprehend it. So like these
and
enlightened
it's so
beings,
counter to what we're
yeah,
told
yeah.
about how to live a great life.
So these enlightened beings and their infinite compassion have worked that out and gone, actually, we need to give the ego something to do. So like, do these mantras 100,000 times, or like do all these prostrations, or do this tumo, or do the dream yoga, whatever it is, like do something. But actually it's the lack of doing that brings us into our enlightened nature at an ultimate level. But because I'm so on the relative and so far from the ultimate, I kind of need stuff to do. Otherwise I feel like I'm not doing it right.
Yeah. And that kind of paradoxically, that idea of needing to do it right that you
Yeah.
talked about with lucid dreaming, like that consciousness pattern of like of being afraid to make a mistake, needing to do it right versus just approaching something with openness and curiosity is kind of like a big saboteur in our lives and
Mm-hmm.
in all the things we try to do, including our spiritual evolution. And, eventually you kind of have to come confront that.
I agree.
Um,
Yeah.
so it's cool to hear how that infiltrates lucid dreaming. So back to your story. So you your mom was telling you, kind of provoking you. What was the inflection point of like, holy shit, I can lucid dream?
Yeah, so it was actually like wetting the bed. So I was a bedwetter till late, till like 7 years old. And I remember clearly having these dreams where I'd be in the dream and I'd need to pee. And the needing to pee, the pressure on my bladder would wake me up in the dream and I would know I was dreaming. So I
Mm.
was lucid. But I would then go around the dream trying to find a toilet because I thought, oh, I don't want to wake up because if I wake up, the sharks under my bed are going to get me. I'm scared of the dark. So I'll just find somewhere to pee in this dream. So I was lucid enough to know I was dreaming, but not so lucid to know that peeing in a dream is a trap. So I would then find a place to pee in the dream. I would pee and I'd wake up and I'd wet the bed, right? So I think it was probably those early experiences that led to my first lucid dreams, um, or the ones the first I can remember. And then when I was a teenager, like 15 years old, then I started to get interested in like intentional lucid dreaming because I was interested in psychedelics and like Buddhism seemed cool, but there was too many rules and all this stuff you had to do. So I kind of put that to the side for a little bit. But lucid dreaming seemed cool. I was like, whoa, there's this practice where you can train yourself to become conscious within the unconscious so that you're literally walking around a huge three-dimensional projection of your own psychology. Like, that sounds freaking cool. So I want to do that. I want to learn it. So I bought the books and then kind of taught myself how to do it from the books. I guess maybe I found it easier because I'd had those earlier experiences. But then, yeah, started having kind of semi-regular lucid dreams, but was just using them on what a 15-year-old would use. Well, maybe I was 15, 16 by this time, sex and skateboarding, right? And I got
Nice.
pretty good at skateboarding, actually. So maybe the kind of neural pathways thing is true. The sex thing, not so much, but I got good at skateboarding.
That's funny. So just there was a somewhat of a you felt like there was somewhat of a translation between the dream and your waking reality in terms of that skill development
Oh
with
yeah, I mean
skateboarding.
that's legit science. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Like you can lucid dreaming, you can create neural pathways in a way that you can't create in the non-lucid dream state. Once the prefrontal cortex activates when you become lucid, the brain thinks you're awake. Of course, your mind knows you're not awake. Your mind knows you're dreaming, but the brain thinks you're awake. Because as far as the brain is concerned, and this is very interesting for anyone who might be interested in simulation theory, or the fact that we might just be brains in a vat of liquid on some scientist's, laboratory on another planet or something, is that as far as the brain is concerned, wakefulness is not predicated on having your eyes open and being like, I'm in the daytime. Wakefulness
Right.
is predicated on prefrontal cortex activation. So once that happens, as it does in the lucid dream state, your brain thinks you're awake. So anything you do in the lucid dream, the brain lays down neural pathways just as it would when you are awake. And not only that, crucially, it stores the memory of what you do in the lucid dream, not as a dream memory, but as a waking memory. And that is the crux of how lucid dream trauma integration happens. Because if you can get lucid in a recurring nightmare, let's say some of the veterans I work with, military veterans, that they're back in Iraq and they can become lucid in this recurring nightmare. But this time they change the ending of the dream from a traumatic ending to a non-traumatic ending. Or if you're in a recurring nightmare, you're in a car crash, but this time you make the car fly. So you escape the danger, or even better, you actually allow the car to crash, knowing there's nothing to die, right? If you can
Mm.
do something like that in the dream, in the lucid dream, the brain doesn't think you dreamt about going to Iraq and having a different experience to the traumatic one. The brain thinks last night you were in Iraq, you had a very similar experience to what happened many years ago, but this time it was different with a non-traumatic ending. I will now go to the hippocampus, the part of the brain that takes long-term to short-term memory, remove the old traumatic memory and replace it with this new non-traumatic memory. We believe that's the underlying biological mechanism of how we've had such powerful results working with ions, actually. Someone, Institute of Noetic Sciences, who I know that you are connected with, when we were working with lucid dreaming to treat PTSD.
Wow. So are you familiar with the memory reconsolidation process? That
That happens in
science?
dreams,
Well,
or is it like there's a name for
it's
a
the
thing?
only it's the only science that supposedly reveals how you can permanently delete an
Mm.
emotionally learned response. And essentially the idea is that you kind of, and you see this in a ton of kind of transformational and alchemical processes, like this underlying sequence of you access and experience some type of, a memory or emotion or state, right? Like being afraid. So you kind of like open and experience it. And as you open and experience it, you then eventually kind of introduce a disconfirming experience.
Mm-hmm.
So you would, get hit by a car in your mind and be okay and be safe.
Mm-hmm.
And there's essentially a replacement
Mm.
updating process to that old
Yeah.
paradigm, pattern, schema, whatever you want to call it, that now as you move around the world, it's like a new set of instructions.
Yeah.
Um,
That
and
sounds
so it
very
sounds like
similar
this
to what's
actually
happening.
happens in dreams,
Mm.
and you can actually work with that process intentionally.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That seems like a great explanation of what seems to be happening in the lucid dream. And of course, non-lucid dreams, just our everyday normal dreams, also help to integrate trauma, of course. But the unique thing about the lucid dream is, one, you get to direct it, and two, the brain doesn't think you're dreaming. The brain thinks you're awake. And it's that
Mm.
unique aspect that seems to provide these really powerful benefits to lucid dreaming. However, lucid dreaming isn't that accessible. It can take weeks to get someone to have their first lucid dream. So it's a very powerful practice, but it does take a bit of effort.
Wow. Yeah. What's coming up for me, because there was another podcast guest we had, David Hamilton.
Good friend of
I
mine.
think
Yeah.
I think he actually introduced us,
Yeah.
where he talked about how visualization, your brain doesn't know the difference
Mm-hmm.
either. Right. And so it's kind of fascinating to think about the human experience. We have these like three different modalities which we could use to basically update our reference system of how reality works. We have the shit that happens in the external world, which we can't
Mm-hmm.
control. We have visualization, and then we have dreams. We have lucid dreams, and we kind of only use one of those, most people at least, to create our underlying structure for interpretation.
Yeah.
It's very interesting, and what an untapped well of potential.
Yeah. You remind me of a Buddhist quote, which is, of the three main experiences of three main experiences of mind: sleep, dream, and waking state. Or in your case, you said sleep, imagination, the waking state. Um, the one with the least capacity for awakening is the daytime state, is the waking state.
Mm.
Like, spiritual practice or spiritual insights are way easier to have in the lucid dream state or in the imaginal or the kind of intra-psychic world than they are in the waking state. Yet, when you ask most people where they do their spiritual practice, unless they're like a lucid dreamer or something like that, they'll say, oh, in the waking state, right? I got to do kind of waking state meditation. And that's great. It's brilliant to do that. But some of the practices we can do in the intra-psychic world, whether it's through full-on lucid dreaming or kind of shamanic journeying, or even psychedelics can bring us into this kind of halfway space of consciousness and unconscious, they work far more powerfully than the waking state. And as you say, most of us think that the only thing we can change is our waking state experience, when in fact, that's one of the hardest things to change, because you've got everyone else too. Whereas you go into a lucid dream, it's a closed circuit. It's only you in there. So like you can really do work at a deep personal level.
Wow, that's amazing. One of the things I wanted to ask you is, there's kind of the Western perspective on lucid dreaming, and then there's actually the kind of ancient wisdom. I know Buddhism has been in kind of your area of study, perspective on this practice, and I would be interested to know kind of how you see those broadly differing, and what you learned exploring the more ancient traditions about this.
Yeah. So I've explored lucid dreaming from the scientific point of view, and obviously I've been part of several scientific studies, some with ION, some with Swansea University in the UK. So I'm very into the science of lucid dreaming and how we can gain scientific proof of the benefits of lucid dreaming. And also, I lived in a Buddhist temple for 7 years, and I've been practicing, not very good, but practicing supposedly Buddhist for like, I don't know, since I was 19. So what's that, like 21 years or something like that. And within Buddhism, there's this whole school of practice called dream yoga, or milam naljor. Milam means dream, naljor is translated as yoga. Actually, it means like natural state, but we can call it yoga, a union. And dream yoga is an ancient practice that includes lucid dreaming. It also includes conscious sleeping and what in the West we would call
Mm.
astral projection or out of body experience. And if you look at the techniques of lucid dreaming and the techniques of dream yoga, at the start, they run in parallel. So a lot of the techniques are very, very similar because the Western scientists were kind of informed by the Buddhists, or they just came up with similar techniques independently. They start like this. Once you get into the lucid dream state, though, they massively diverge. Because from a Western scientific point of view, the main reason we would use lucid dreaming is some sort of integration of the self. So we would use it to work with trauma. We would use it to do inner child work. You could do it to face phobias. You can do it to train in sports and then get better at those sports in the waking state. You can ask big questions. So kind of entrepreneurially, you can go into the lucid dream and call out, show me what I need to see, or help me. What help do I need on this project? You can kind of ask these questions. Your unconscious mind will reply with these answers. And you can just use it for fun, right? Sex and skateboarding. However, once you get into the lucid dream state from a Buddhist point of view, you're using the lucid dream state not for the integration of the self as it is in the West, but the complete moving beyond the illusory notion of the self and into a place where you can reach full spiritual awakening while you sleep. Like the
Mm.
the if you look at the kind of the way the place that Western lucid dreaming tops out, the kind of most powerful experiences you can have in lucid dream are things like integration of post-traumatic stress disorder and things like that. Amazing, amazing work, but it kind of tops out there. If you look at where it tops out in Tibetan Buddhism, it's full spiritual awakening, full spiritual enlightenment. The first Karmapa, who was like the head of the particular Buddhist lineage that I'm in some way part of, he reached full enlightenment in a lucid dream. So he went to
Wow.
sleep like a highly, highly realized meditation master, but not fully enlightened. Had a lucid dream that night, did a certain practice in the lucid dream, and woke up fully enlightened. That's like nuts, right? This,
That's a
like,
hell of a sleep right
yeah,
there.
exactly. Like Harry Potter's got nothing on this, right? I mean, thus have I heard. Who knows if this happened, but thus have I heard, and I do believe that it's true. So the potential for full spiritual awakening is how far you can take it with dream yoga. Whereas in the West, we seem to kind of level out at integration of trauma and stuff like that. And I think both are great to explore.
Mm.
You know,
And I'm
and
sure they're both part of a continuum, right? That it is the same
absolutely.
continuum because I imagine trauma is, I mean, I know it is a part of what gets in the way of that enlightenment.
Yes. And if you look at yes, and also it's fuel for it. No mud, no lotus. Often it's people who've suffered most who
Mm.
have the most fuel to kind of fire
Yeah.
that enlightened process, actually. So I think it's in many ways not I'm saying you require trauma to have these awakening experiences, but trauma can be absolutely harnessed for awakening. Absolutely. And in fact, if you look at the Tibetan dream yoga stuff, they have this like 4 stages of dream yoga. The first stage is recognition, which is basically learn to lucid dream, become lucid in the dream. The second stage, though, so the first thing these ancient Tibetan masters advise you to do in the lucid dream is transformation of fear. Basically, do
Mm.
scary stuff. It says things like jump from a high place knowing you cannot fall, walk into fire knowing that you cannot be burnt. And my favorite one is call forth a tiger into the dream. And then when the tiger's there, you've got options. It says like you can transform you can befriend the tiger, you can transform the tiger into a Buddha, or you can ride the tiger like a friendly horse. Now, part of my job is how do we update that? What they're saying there is basically do scary stuff, do shadow integration, work with what's scary for you. So nowadays, when I'm with the veterans, I think, what's your tiger? What were Tibetans scared of in the Middle Ages? High places, they're in the Himalayas, fire, classic human fear, and snow leopards, tigers, right? Because they kind of roamed about. When we work with the veterans, what's their high place? What's their
Mm.
fire they're scared to walk into? And crucially, what's their tiger they can call into the dream? And for them, their tiger may be, some sort of reliving of the traumatic events of the war zone they've come from. So I think actually you find, just as you said, there is a continuum here. Because even in ancient Tibet, they realized that until you worked with the underlying shadow content made up of our fear, our shame, our trauma, we may not have the kind of chi energy required for the more
Right.
advanced levels of dream yoga that come after that.
Yeah. I'm so happy you're talking about chi energy, I've primarily been focused in a Taoist
Mm,
chi oriented type of lineage. And I was interested to understand the relationship between chi and, I would say, the broader relationship between spiritual evolution and lucid dreaming. And also, how does chi relate to that,
yeah.
from what you understand?
hmm So, in the Western scientific model, the way you can tell if someone has had a lucid dream, the kind of biological marker of it is the reactivation of the right dorsolateral prefrontal cortex within the REM dreaming sleep state. So basically, when you become lucid, when you have that, aha, I'm dreaming, I'm in a dream right now, part of the brain activates that is usually not activated in normal REM dreaming sleep, the right dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. If you ask my Tibetan Buddhist teacher, Lama Yeshe Rinpoche, what happens when we become lucid, he will say, it actually used the word lung, which is like the Tibetan word for prana, which we could say is a Sanskrit word for chi. You know, it's
Right.
similar words here, similar concepts, I believe. He would say it's chi or the lung entering the central channel. That's what makes you lucid.
Mm,
So anything that helps to raise the chi or allows you to control the chi or to guide the chi is very helpful for lucid dreaming. So any form of qigong practice, tai chi practice, certain martial arts, tumo, so the inner heat practice, maybe even some of the people who are doing Wim Hof, which is kind of like a kind of, I'm definitely inspired by tumo. I mean, it's not tumo. It's crazy when people say that Wim Hof is tumo. If they'd ever done traditional Tibetan tumo, they'd know it's tiny similarities, but it's completely different. But anyway, maybe people who are doing Wim Hof are actually still accessing that chi, and people who are doing tumo, traditional Buddhist tumo, definitely are. So yes, there is a strong link between accessing chi and having lucid dreams.
that makes sense to me. In the lineage that I study in Ren Shui, they talk about Shen, the true self, essentially needing energy, like needing chi
Mm,
to access its full capacities. And so, just a very basic example of this is like, why do you feel more clear and like you might be able to visualize or use your consciousness more intentionally in the morning? It's
mm,
because you have more chi. It's
mhm,
because your underlying awareness has more chi available that gets gradually depleted throughout the day.
mhm.
And so, yeah, it would seem that as that kind of overall chi condition improves and the flow improves, that's kind of the input to so many different latent capacities. And I don't see why enhanced dream capacity wouldn't be just another one of those.
Yeah, and in fact, there's a lucid dreaming technique where you wake up a couple of hours earlier than usual and stay awake for an hour, like being fully awake. And one of the things I advise you to do in that hour are some chi practices, things like qigong or kind of the Tibetan version of qigong, as a way to raise the chi. And then you fall back asleep because you're still tired enough to fall asleep because you woke up 2 hours before you usually wake up. So you're still tired enough to drop back asleep, but you've raised the chi. So you raise the chi, then drop back asleep, and it makes lucid
Mm.
dreaming easier. And of course, the Western version of that technique is the famous wake back to bed technique that they use now in many of the scientific studies. So again, like the scientists came across the same thing, they're just using different terminology, but it's essentially having the same effect.
I hope you're enjoying this conversation so far. If you like what you hear, let me know by clicking like, subscribing to the channel, and responding with a comment around something that you found interesting in the conversation so far. In addition to these videos, I do a lot of writing on the exploration of consciousness and my own personal revelations in my newsletter called Consciousness, the Doorway to Human Evolution. To receive these updates and more, all you need to do is simply head to the link in the description below and you'll be added to the community of 20,000 plus consciousness explorers receiving weekly ideas and inspiration in their inbox. I look forward to hearing from you there. Now let's get back to the show. Interesting. Now, another phenomena that I think you alluded to that I've heard some of the people that I've studied with talk about is this notion of just simply remaining conscious throughout the entirety of your sleep.
Mm.
Um, and I don't know if that is a component of dreaming or what's going on there. And I don't know if that's what you meant by kind of conscious sleeping, but like, I feel like I've experienced a little bit of that where my wife tells me I'm asleep and I'm just laying there in complete stillness.
Yep.
And she's like, you're literally snoring.
Okay,
And
perfect.
I'm like, I'm not snoring. And she's like, you've been snoring for 45 minutes. And I've just been sitting there in a blank state. So I don't know if that's what it is or it's something else, but I'm very interested to learn more about that.
Yeah, so often I use the snore actually as a perfect example of this. So when I'm talking about conscious sleeping or even teaching the conscious sleeping stuff, I'll say, who here has heard themselves snore? And a lot of people will raise their hand. I say, okay, so if you heard yourself snore, then you were conscious. You were going, oh, that's me snoring. I had self-reflective awareness, while at the same time as being asleep, because you can't fake a snore. So if you ever heard yourself snoring, you have been conscious sleeping. And that example you gave of your wife, where you felt that you were fully awake, but she knew that you were asleep because you were snoring, perfect example of conscious sleeping. I mean, the one thing you just didn't quite have is the awareness of sleeping at the time of sleeping, but you were like a fraction away from it. And definitely like try that again, but this time see if you can kind of hear yourself snoring. Essentially, the conscious sleeping stuff is in a cycle of sleep. If in like an 8 hour sleep cycle, only about 2 hours of those are dreaming, or like 2.5 max. So the majority of your sleep is not dreaming sleep. You know, REM is a very active form of sleep, but it doesn't make up the majority of it. The majority of your sleep is actually made of light sleep, which is where you are asleep and blacked out, but your brain is not projecting images. So you're not dreaming. If you wake someone from light sleep and say, like, what were you dreaming about? They would often say, I wasn't dreaming. I was kind of thinking about something. I was kind of exploring a concept or thinking about something. They wouldn't there'd be no visual dream to report back. So the Vajrayana Buddhists were like, well, look, if we only focus on becoming lucid in our dreams, then okay, cool. We've got like 2.5 hours a night where we're still able to do our spiritual practice. But what about the other 6 hours based on an 8 hour sleep cycle, right? So they developed this set of practices that allow them to not only lucid dream, but lucid sleep. So the first stage of sleep is the hypnagogic state, right? So that's the kind of falling asleep, the nodding dog bit, where you can still hear the sounds in the room. You can still feel your body in the bed. You wouldn't say you blacked out yet, but you're getting there. And how can we stay lucid in that? Yoga Nidra, or as popularized by Andrew Huberman, who's now calling it NSDR, non-sleep deep rest. A very good rebrand from Mr. Huberman. He, like me, realized that if you apply for funding and use the word yoga in the funding, a lot of medical institutions will
They're
look
not
the
going to
other way.
like that.
Yeah. Whereas you change it. So I started calling it like hypnagogic meditation rather than yoga nidra. He's called it NSDR. So we've got kind of yoga nidra or NSDR to stay lucid in the hypnagogic state. Then into light sleep, you've got the conscious sleeping practices, kind of like the one I just mentioned. Then you've got lucid dreaming and deep sleep. Lucid dreaming and REM sleep. And then, of course, you've got deep sleep. Now, consciousness in deep sleep is the only practice that Western science currently does not they don't agree with, but hasn't been able to prove. Like lucid dreaming has been proven since like 1975. Obviously, a lot of research into the benefits of yoga nidra. But the ability to be conscious within deep sleep, when the brain is in these really long, slow delta waves, the brain's almost entirely switched off. Western medical science is yet to agree that that's possible. But we have thousands of years from both the Buddhist traditions, the Toltec Mexica traditions of ancient Mexico, the Sufi tradition, the Hindu tradition that say, no, it is totally possible to be lucid in deep sleep. And actually, lucidity in deep sleep can lead to one of the most profound experiences available to us, which is the clear light of sleep, which is an experience of non-dual awareness within the sleep state. And that's actually the pinnacle of dream yoga. Lucid dreaming is the warm-up. We use lucid dreams to get to the clear light state that's beyond it. So yeah, the whole of sleep, as you say, we can be conscious throughout the whole of sleep. And the Dalai Lama has said the ability to transition from the waking state into sleep, maintain consciousness for an entire cycle and out the other side is the highest achievement of the yogi. Because that would be like yoga nidra as you go to sleep, then into conscious sleeping, light sleep, then into clear light of sleep, deep sleep, then into a lucid dream at the end. Because that's the kind of order the sleep cycles go. And if you can do that, then you've nailed it, apparently.
Wow. Okay. So apparently means you haven't done that yet.
No.
Personally.
No. I mean, the clear light of sleep stuff, I get out of my depth very quickly because I've had very few experiences of it. And at the moment, they've been stumbled into. Like the clear
Mm.
light can be, well, they've been stumbled into or they've been accessed through the lucid dream. One of the ways to access the clear light is consciousness, being consciously aware in deep sleep. The other way is to go into the lucid dream and do a practice that explodes the dream. So the dream state shatters, and behind it's almost like the dream is a canvas that is being hung
Right.
on the wall of the clear light. So if you can explode the dream, you can enter the clear light beyond it. But what the Dalai Lama is talking about is not the shortcut that I can do through lucid dreaming. He's talking about the real road, which is from the moment you fall asleep at night, conscious, 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 conscious for an entire cycle and repeatedly. So for like, if you're sleeping for 6 hours, there will be a thread of consciousness that stays aware for an entire 6 hour process as you go through the 4 stages of sleep. Yeah, I definitely cannot do that.
Wow. Wow. Interesting.
Yet,
And the
yet.
clear light sleep, is that phenomena from what you gather or have experienced to some extent, just pure, just a complete whiteness in the visual field, that's just, you just are immersed in? Is that why it's called that, or is it something else?
So the clear light is less, you will never have the experience of going, I am in the clear light. The sense
I
of
see.
self is so shattered upon entry into the clear light that actually the only reference points you've got are your entry into it and your exit out of it. The actual experience in itself will be more like there's no body, completely disembodied. Sense of self is incredibly diffuse. You can barely know you're in there because the sense of knowing requires a self to label it. And all labeling
Mm.
capacity is gone because you're in this completely different space, mind space. So again, as you see, I get out of my depth very quickly. But it is possible. It's definitely not like a recreational experience. Like, because of course, to get to there has to be a complete dissolution of the sense of self, which the first few times it happens feels like you're dying. I haven't actually done DMT, but when people explain the feeling of when the DMT hits and the sense of their sense of self just shattering to a million pieces, and then there's a space beyond that, I think, that sounds similar. Or
Mm.
there's something there. There's something similar going on there. But I haven't done DMT, so I don't know.
I think a question that probably comes up for a lot of people in this, just based on kind of what we've been conditioned to believe about sleep, is well, if I'm conscious the whole time, then am I going to wake up feeling refreshed? Like, what happens to my body? Like, what happens to all this restorative function
Yeah.
that occurs when I sleep the way I do now?
So here's the thing. Let's look at lucid dreaming for a start. So lucid dreaming happens in REM dreaming sleep. REM dreaming sleep is not a restful sleep state. So you're not resting in REM. In fact, you're burning calories in REM because it takes so much blood flow to create the electrical impulses that make the huge hallucinations that we call dreaming, that it actually burns calories. So you're not resting when you dream. So from a lucid dreaming point of view, you can actually have more restful dreaming sleep when you're lucid because like, it's
Mm.
happening. You're like, oh, wow, I'm in here right now. I'm conscious. I'm calm.
And you can
Like,
meditate in your lucidity, right? That's a
absolutely,
big
yeah,
technique.
yeah. If you do spiritual
Yeah.
practice within it, then it even maximizes that. As for the other stages of sleep, the Buddhist teachings say that the mind's natural capacity is one of cognizant awareness. So the weird thing is not being conscious. The weird thing is lack of consciousness. So actually,
Mm.
it's not strange to have lucid dreams. It's strange to have non-lucid dreams. It's strange that we are so non-aware. So the act of being aware in the hypnagogic, in the light sleep, in the deep sleep, in the dream, in the hypnopompic coming out of it is actually the natural state. And a bit like we said at the beginning, or was this when we were off camera? I can't remember what we were. I think we were on camera at this time, where we said that the spiritual path is about removing the veils of ignorance that prevent us seeing that we're
Right.
already enlightened. It's like the natural quality of the mind is cognizant awareness. So actually to be cognizant within all stages of sleep is the natural state. And you'll wake up feeling not just as refreshed as you would have if you had blackout sleep, but way more, because the kind of blackout of sleep is so gross. It's such a gross kind of I'm tired blackout. It's really like base level gross rest. And of course it's needed for the body at certain times, absolutely. But for example, something like the clear light, like one moment of clear light experience is worth like 100 years of sleep. Like it's the
Wow.
source. It's no, sorry, the force. Robert Thurman recently described it as the force, like in Star Wars, right? He's like, that's the force. If you can just fingertip to the force, like the power is huge. However, I would caveat this: learning lucid dreaming, learning conscious sleeping, even learning maybe not yoga nidra, but learning conscious sleeping, learning lucid dreaming is tiring because you don't always get it, right? You're doing all these practices to
Mm.
try to become lucid. And when you are lucid, it's highly refreshing. And when you are conscious in sleep, it's highly refreshing. But all of the near misses where you don't quite become conscious, so you just stay awake all night, or where you don't quite become lucid, so you just have normal dreams, yeah, those can be tiring. So the practice itself is rejuvenating, but learning the practice, yeah, that can be tiring.
Do you see any relationship between having a background in contemplative practice and the ease at which you can learn lucid dreaming?
Yes and no. I think a lot of the kind of concepts around lucid dreaming are more palatable for those who have some sort of background in meditation or contemplation or spiritual practice. However, multiple scientific studies have actually shown that doing a lot of meditation doesn't give you more lucid dreams. It makes your lucid
Mm.
dreams longer. So once you're in the lucid dream state, if you have trained your mind to be able to stay in the present moment, then you will be able to stay on the tightrope of lucidity with waking one side and non-lucid dreaming the other with greater ease, definitely. But as far as frequency of lucid dreams, actually all the research points towards, and this is interesting what we're talking about flow, about chi, is flow state activities, direct causal correlation between people
Mm.
who do regular flow state activities, which could be dancing, could be rock climbing, could be knitting, is a really good way to get into a flow state, could be playing an instrument but not reading music, so kind of, maybe freestyling on an instrument. People who have regular flow state experiences, they have higher frequency of lucid dreams. So much so that on my retreats, most nights we dance. And it's not just
Wow.
because it's fun to dance and put on some cool music. It's because I want to give people half an hour of flow state activity before they go to bed, because I know that increases their chance of getting lucid. The same with Qigong and Tai Chi, especially repeated sequences of Qigong and Tai Chi that allow you to really get into that flow state experience, definitely lead to more lucid dreams. And of course, with the Qi, I would say it's not, with the Tai Chi, I'd say it's not just the flow state, it's the fact you're moving Qi as well.
Interesting. One of the other relationships I was curious if you've done any research on is cerebral spinal fluid.
Yeah.
Um, because one of the guests I had on the show, a guy named Moro Zapatera, he's a Harvard scientist, blah blah blah, doctor and a million things, but really focuses on cerebral spinal fluid. And he talked about how the degree to which we're refreshed is more a function of the detoxification that occurs
Totally.
through cerebral spinal fluid than it is whether we got like 8 hours of sleep or 4 hours of sleep or whatever it is. And yeah, I'm just curious what you've learned about that.
Yeah, so we know that the main function of deep sleep is not only to release human growth hormone, which helps your muscles grow and your hair grow and all that stuff. It's the movement of cerebral spinal fluid up through the brainstem into the brain, and it kind of flows between the blood capillaries in the brain. And those blood capillaries in the brain go big, small, big, small, big, small, which creates a flushing motion. So in deep sleep, you're basically flushing cerebral spinal fluid through the brain, through the architecture of the brain. A bit like, if you had a fruit smoothie, you finished all the smoothie, but there's still the kind of dregs of the fruit all covered on the sides, right? Then you put a bit of water in the bottle, you shake it up, and you can get all the smoothie out and the bottle's clean. That's basically what's happening. And the thing that the cerebral spinal fluid is detoxifying or shaking out of the brain or clearing out are tau proteins, which are directly linked to Alzheimer's and dementia, which is
Mm.
why lack of deep sleep directly leads to dementia. So deep sleep is so important for doing that. And interestingly, another thing we found more recently, this study came out a couple of years ago, is that one of the breathing techniques called coherent breathing, which is a
Mm.
symmetrical breathing technique of around 5 breaths a minute, um, actually creates the same movement of cerebral spinal fluid. Now, I'm not saying, of course, that you don't need sleep. You can just do loads of coherent breathing. But what we have found is if you have missed a night's sleep, So you have missed the 2.5 hours of deep, 2 to 3 hours of deep sleep where this flushing process will be occurring. If the next day you could do 1 hour of coherent breathing, which does a similar thing, it can greatly reduce the negative impact of that missed night's sleep. So yeah,
Mm.
definitely a big connection between cerebral spinal fluid and sleep and dreams. Well, sleep.
Is that coherent breathing kind of the Heart Math Institute's coherent, breathing meditation thing? I know that's a
So
big
yeah, I
part of
know
what
they
they
work
do.
with coherence, and yeah, that's where it comes from. So basically, if you get someone to breathe at approximately 5 breaths a minute, in perfect symmetry. So 6 seconds in, 6 seconds out, 5 breaths a minute for very specific, but 7 minutes or more, then the electrical impulses of the brain, the heart, and the lungs move into coherence. They start, so they're all over the place. You can see this on the Heart Math do this, right? Where you can visualize, where you see it on the screen. And then after about 7 minutes, they'll start to go, boom, boom, and that's very cool. And that's like scientifically, medically recognized. And you don't need to believe in it. You can be watching the TV if you like at the same time. But if you breathe in that very specific rhythm for at least 7 minutes or more, the electrical rhythms of the brain, heart, and lungs move into synchrony or coherence. And that is very, very good for the psychophysical system. Once someone's in
Mm.
coherence, pretty much anything they can measure in the lab becomes optimized. Everything from heart rate variability to blood flow to blood pressure to alpha waves in the brain. You kind of enter into this optimized state. So much so that they've said there is an optimal human breath rate, and it is around 5 breaths a minute for 90% of the population.
Mm.
If you are way over 6 foot, you are very big, you might want to change those breath rates. But for 90% of people who are of average height and weight, breathing at 5 breaths a minute is said to be the optimal human breath rate. Which I was shocked when I read that. I was like, fuck off, come on. You can't say that
Yeah.
everybody should breathe the same way. And I just read paper after paper after paper. I was like, wow, it does seem like 5 breaths a minute is pretty good for most people. Yeah.
That's so interesting. Yeah, I remember there's this book called Heart, Breath, Mind, and it teaches you resonant breathing in order to essentially get to your very specific uh, like breathing rate,
Oh, cool.
and start to retrain yourself. And he uses a technology called Elite HRV to essentially kind of calibrate the
Yeah.
HRV with the breathing rate. And I did it for a while. It was badass. It was cool. I have no idea whether I still breathe that rate, but I
But great
think
to
for
explore
people
it.
that are, yeah, I mean, it's a very systematic approach to exploring that, um, regulation. And
Yeah.
so for
Yeah.
anybody that is interested in that, I'll make sure to link that out.
And most of us are breathing super fast. Average American breath rate is like 15 to 20 breaths a minute. That's so
Holy moly.
fast. In the 80s when I was born, so the average American breath rate in 1980 is 7.5 breaths a minute. What the hell has happened in the last 40 years to more than double the average breath rate? Maybe the same thing that's doubled the rates of diabetes, heart disease, Alzheimer's. I'm not saying it's direct, but maybe they could be exacerbated by our fast breathing. And I would back that up by saying you get people to breathe slower, and all those aforementioned diseases of the body and mind can be mitigated, or at least help to be treated. Yeah, breathe
Yeah, well, I
slower.
think a lot of shit's happened and continues to happen, but it's amazing to know about these resources that we can use to empower ourselves.
Yeah. I always find it
Um,
ironic that when I talk about the slow breathing, I get so excited I start breathing really fast. And I'm always really aware that people are watching this guy saying, slow down your breathing, slow down your breathing, we breathe too fast.
oh man, yeah, that's great. One of the questions I wanted to ask you about. So you can think about lucid dreaming as this kind of foray into exploring the unconscious, which has a tremendous impact and influence on how we perceive and experience reality.
Mm-hmm.
How can people think about, like, broadly speaking, learning using lucid dreaming to improve their waking experience?
I mean, I can't really think of anything you would use lucid dreaming for that doesn't improve your waking experience. Like, the way that you see if lucid dreaming has worked is the effect on your waking state experience. And this is why I love it. There's nothing to believe in. There's no faith you have to have. Like, if you have a fear of spiders and you've heard rightly so, that lucid dreaming can be a powerful way to integrate phobias in the same way as exposure therapy. You can go into the lucid dream and hold a spider in your hand. And your brain doesn't think you're dreaming about holding a spider in your hand. Your brain thinks you're actually doing it. And because it's a novel action, something you've never done before because you're scared of spiders, the brain necessarily has to create a new neural pathway to support that action. So let's say you're holding that spider in your hand and you're working with your fear of spiders. The next day in the waking state, you should and could check whether it's worked. How? Look at your startle reflex with spiders. Like, if it's really worked powerfully, the next day you'll be able to hold a spider in your hand without freaking out. There are ways of testing it. So pretty much everything, whether it's spiritual practice in the lucid dream, whether it's asking big questions, what career path should I take? And receiving an answer from yourself, of course, who else is in there, right? But it's that higher self, that self beyond the critical judgment of the waking state ego mind. Everything we do in lucid dreams is for waking state betterment, because we're asleep for a third of our lives, right? Which sounds like huge, but we're awake for 2/3 of it. So if these sleep and dream practices don't directly benefit the 2/3 of our life that we're awake, maybe they're not such a big deal. Imagine if when you integrated a trauma in a lucid dream, it meant you stopped having nightmares, but in the waking state, you were still traumatized. Then you'll be like, oh, okay, so it means, lucid dreaming only affects what happens in the night. It only affects my dreams, but it doesn't. We know that if you integrate a trauma in the lucid dream, not only will your nightmares stop, so the nighttime trauma will stop, but your waking state trauma can be greatly decreased as well. Everything in the lucid dream we do is for waking state benefit. Otherwise, me personally, I know we shouldn't be kind of results driven, but I kind of like to see if something's working or not. And if lucid dreaming didn't profoundly change our waking state, I don't think I would have given it as much time as I have. And I would advise people to try this out. I mean, this is the cool thing, right? If anything that we've said over this past hour or so, and you thought you just call bullshit, you're like, no way you can use lucid dreaming for that, or no way. First of all, Google it and check the science. But firstly, more importantly, try it. Just try it out and see, because it works and it's replicable. And anything that I've said that works for someone else, it can work for you in the lucid dream state too. So yeah, try it out. But as far as waking state applications, it can be used to integrate trauma. You can work with your inner child and deal with all your childhood stuff. You can ask big questions. You can you can call out things like, show me what I need to see in relation to a certain work project. You can just use it for fun if you like. You can use it for spiritual practice. You can use it in a big way for shadow integration. So any kind of fear or shame or unexpressed shadow
limiting
goals
beliefs
that you might have.
too.
Yeah, absolutely. And also you can meet personifications. This is like a really big thing that I use a lot, that I use lucid dreaming a lot for, is that in the lucid dream, psychological concepts like fear, like love, all of your archetypes, like the wise man, the magician, the warrior, the lover, they are personified. So in the waking state, it might say like, tune into your inner warrior. Okay, tune into my inner warrior. I'm kind of connecting with my inner warrior. But however much I really tune in, I will never have the experience or yet of a literal warrior being in front of me, whose necklace I can hear jangling, whose spear I can feel in the ground, whose sweat I can smell. That's just not going to happen in the waking state. My power of visualization isn't good enough. But in the lucid dream, if you call out to meet your inner warrior, you will meet a symbolic personification of your connection to the warrior archetype, who you can touch, and they're solid and they smell of sweat, and you can ask them like, how can I help you? And they'll like give you advice about how you can integrate the warrior. I mean, this stuff is just, it's so crazy. It's
Dude,
so huge.
Have you seen the Terrence Howard Joe Rogan podcast?
Who was it? Joe Rogan
Terrence Howard. He's a very famous actor in the US, and he talks about how lucid dreaming, when he was 5 years old, he basically was in a lucid dream and he met this being, and he said, the being said, what do you want to know? And he said, I want to know how things work. And he started to lucid dream every night and basically get like, as he puts it, the secrets of the universe.
Okay, is Terrence Howard quite a far out dude who did the thing on Rogan about 6 months ago, and it's like this long kind of spiritual rant?
it's not a rant. It's more about like our physics is
I
wrong.
didn't mean to
Our like
like negatively,
all
but yeah, I know the show you're talking about. That guy is far out. It was one of the few
dude,
times I saw Joe Rogan just like,
it's crazy what he says.
yeah,
And then what he says, that being in the dream that showed him everything, he eventually realized it was him.
yeah,
It
man.
was
Who
is
else?
him. And so, you know,
Yes, I have
take
seen
what
that one.
take
That is
take
a
what you
far out
will
episode.
with the truth of it, but it's a fascinating foray into what we've been talking about. And you know, how someone has applied it. He literally has like 97 patents based on the information that he got in dreams
Yeah, I mean, I would
about
love
like
to see that guy's
propulsion
dream
and all this
diary. He is
stuff.
far out. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, just to finish this out, I wanted to ask you, like, what does your lucid dreaming practice look like today personally?
Yeah. Um, so since the beginning of the year, so I got flown out to Chicago in February to do a scientific study. So they hooked me up with all the brain scanners and stuff. So heavy Western science, but what they were studying was Tibetan dream yoga techniques. So they wanted to get all the kind of scientific measurements of people in the lucid dream doing Tibetan Buddhist dream yoga practices. So I was like, oh, this is perfect. This is my perfect meeting of science and spirituality, right? Now, I was in the lab for 4 nights, and actually, I didn't do that well. I found it very hard to get to sleep with all the brain things on me, and you've got all these like pads like all over your face too. I found it very difficult. I only managed to get one lucid dream. However, in the training for that, because I felt so like, oh, they're flying me out there, I need to get really up on my training. I got really back into the traditional Tibetan dream yoga stuff. Um, and then kind of didn't go back because it made me remember like, wow, how powerful the traditional stuff is. And of course, working with the inner child is brilliant, and doing shadow work is brilliant, and asking big questions is great. And I still absolutely teach that. But in my personal practice, it's been much more the Tibetan dream yoga stuff. And I had some of the most profound experiences of my life. Actually, about 3 days after the study ended, I had the biggest, most powerful lucid dream of my life. And I was like, oh no, I wasn't in the lab. You know, what would have been the neural correlates of that experience? But who
Wow.
knows, man? Fate didn't want it to happen. So at the moment, but in answer to your question, what am I doing? So there's, I mean, this is going to sound very, very far out, but we're at the end. So let's go there. In Tibetan Buddhism, you have this idea of the pure realms or pure lands, which are nirvanic states of existence. So they are spaces that can be visited through your mind. That are, it's kind of like visiting nirvana, basically. You're kind of visiting these nirvanic spaces. Any Buddhist will say, oh, it's not like visiting nirvana, it's something different. But let's call pure realms like nirvanic realms of existence. So yeah, the dream plan for this year has been visiting those realms. And when you visit them, of course, nothing is going anywhere. Um, and you realize that stuff there is not made how stuff is made here. It's made of light. Like form is made of light in these spaces. So you have these very, very interesting and very powerful experiences of visiting worlds that are made of light. Yeah. And so that's what I'm working on at the moment.
Wow, hell yeah. There's a book called The Universal One that talks about how this reality is made of light. And so
Yeah.
there's an overlap with that. I believe it's Walter Russell,
And I think it is
which
actually, if
is,
you look at the kind of the quantum, quantum field and stuff like that, it's light, right? We're in a light world, but we don't see it. We see it as this kind of form, this kind of gross, dense form. And maybe in the lucid dream, right? Yeah, who knows? That's interesting. Maybe it's not you're going to a pure realm. It's that, like we said at the beginning, you're removing the veils of
you're
ignorance that
seeing it
stops you
clearly.
seeing that it's made of light anyway. You know, I was probably in my bedroom. I didn't go anywhere. I was in my bedroom, but seeing it as light. Who knows?
Wow. Cool shit, man. Well, we'll have to maybe bring it back and talk about what that's like
Yeah,
in
man, let's
more
do it.
depth in the future. But I want to give you just a quick chance to let everybody know if this resonated and they're excited about maybe exploring this on their own journey, where they can find more resources and follow your work.
Sure. So my website, charliemorley.com, and then my Instagram page, Charlie Morley Lucid Dreaming. Apparently, if you just put Charlie Lucid into Google, all my stuff comes up. Someone did that recently. So there you go, Charlie Lucid. And yeah, there's workshops and retreats and online stuff and pre-recorded stuff and live stuff and facilitate the training for any therapists who want to learn to bring this into that context. So yeah, you'll find it all.
Epic. Well, we'll link all that out. And Charlie, thanks so much, man. This was just an absolute blast.
Oh,
Really
thank
appreciate
you.
what you're doing.
Cool. Thanks so much, man. It's been a pleasure.
I be